And welcome back, everybody, to the Law and Crime Network. I'm your host for this afternoon, Rachel Stockman, and we are continuing to review some of the prosecution's opening statements in just a horrific case of an alleged serial killer out of Ohio. We are streaming this case live. They are on a brief lunch break, but should be back around 1 o'clock, and we will take you live into that courtroom. In the meantime, I want to bring in my guest, Vince Velazquez, who's a retired homicide detective from the Atlanta area. He joins me by Skype, and criminal defense attorney Mark Eiglarsh is with me. And I just want to say, Vince and I go way back because I was actually with Vince when but really him, solved a case of a serial killer in Atlanta, and this case was actually featured on the First 48 on A&E. So he's a bit of an expert in this kind of arena of serial killers. We sent you some of the details of this case. What do you make here? Take me inside the mind of this man, Vince.
Yeah, this is bizarre. So I've had 3 serial killer cases in my career, and all equally different. But one thing that stands out in this case is this gap in time between his first murder and what we believe to be when he started murdering again. And I'm just confused, and I'm wondering if there are other bodies out there, because that's serial killers typically don't take a break like 10 years. But just reading some of the notes and some of the news stories I've seen on this case, definitely he's got some issues. Whether he's competent to stand trial, obviously he is. They ruled it. We're at trial with it now, but he's definitely got some mental.
So what does it mean, Vince, to be a serial killer, right? That term gets thrown around, but there's actually a definition that in order to qualify under, FBI procedures, that he has to kill a certain amount of people in a certain amount of time. Is that correct?
Typically it's 2 or more, but it's more. More goes towards motive.
Okay.
And the MO. So, if it's a similar, like if it's a sexual assault murder and his MO is to rape, strangle, and similarly bind and torture his victims, that will start to fit in as a serial killer. Now, certainly there are people out there who have committed numerous murders, people who are drug dealers. That doesn't make them a serial killer. That's part of their business.
What do you see as this guy's MO? And then I want Mark to weigh in about this insanity possible defense they may raise. But what do you see, Vince, as this guy's MO?
Well, it appears to be some sexual motivation. Obviously, there is some evidence that these women were sexually assaulted. The victim that survived, I'm sure, has given some information to that effect. He's given some reasons of why he killed one person in particular, because she stole money. But it seems to me, and I'm not a psychologist, I can only go by what I've experienced, that he's got some type of issue with women, obviously, and feels either inferior, and this is his way of showing power over women.
Very interesting, Mark. If we do see the defense go down an insanity route, based on the facts of what we know, how difficult will that be to prove?
His chances of prevailing with an insanity defense is so low, so remote, it approaches almost no real value.
Which brings me back to my original question when we first brought you in, Mark, which is why the heck this case is going to trial.
So let's role play here, okay? You're all prosecutors. I come to you and say, hey guys, I got this new one. I got the Gates trial. Yeah, I'm thinking about probation. What are y'all thinking? And your response?
Ludicrous. Absolutely crazy.
Right. What your response is, let's negotiate voltage, I mean, that's really what the negotiations are over. So it's, it's not like a case where they're going to offer, let's reduce, the counts down to manslaughter and we'll give them 10 years. There's no negotiations like that. This was always going to trial. There's no way out of this.
I think so, too. And do you think that the fact that the death penalty is on the table had something to do with that as well?
Yes, and sometimes you can say, take the death penalty off the table, he'll plead guilty, like the prosecutors.
But what prosecutor is going to want to do that in a case like this, especially if this is an option?
They are, they aren't.
I would think they would not. I mean, if you have a case this grisly and this horrible, if death penalty is an option and you're the prosecutor and this is, and obviously you believe in the death penalty, why wouldn't you go after the death penalty in a case like this?
I agree with you, okay? You've got prosecutors here in South Florida still seeking the death penalty. Granted, it's apples to oranges on Cruz, the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooter, who's, a teenager with extensive mental illness, and the defense is rolling out a guilty plea and a life sentence on a silver platter, and they say no to that. Case like this, where the guy has told everyone except me and your guest that he killed these people, that's not a guy you cut a break to,
So Vince, since you've been on, you said 3 serial killer cases in your career?
I have, yes.
Okay. In how many of those cases were you actually able to get the suspect to agree to an interview with you, and did they talk?
Okay, 2 of the 3, they did talk, and what I find, and this may be the case with this guy here, there's a level of narcissism, I think, that is involved here. Like, not only did he kill these women, now he's got a stage to show his work. Let me show you what I did. He almost bragged about what he did, and in my opinion, took great pleasure in letting everybody know how he killed these women. So,
Rachel, let me add to that. You had asked what the interview would be like with this guy from the defense perspective. This, again, I'm speculating, but I think it's based upon reasonable, known facts. This is how it went. The defense is in the room with him, and at some point, whether it be at the initial meeting or some point later, he says to them, I've checked the elements of murder, and one of the elements is I have to kill someone. But if they were already dead before I killed them, then it wouldn't be murder. In his mind, he erroneously believes from the statements that he's given that these women were already dead. That's what he's going around saying. They were already dead even though they were alive. That's his sick thinking.
So that sounds like insanity to me, Mark.
Yes, insanity is the best argument you can make, but it's a loser 99% of the time, and in this case, 99.99999% of the time. All you have to do, you can be mentally ill, but if you know right from wrong, like hiding a body because that Officer Friendly is going to find it, that's enough for any juror.
Okay, so I'm kind of dying in this case to see. We know that the police talked to Shawn Grate, and I bet you there's no doubt they're going to be playing those police interviews during this trial. So I want Vince, because this is such an important thing. When you're in that interrogation room with a suspected serial killer, every interaction that's going to happen between you and this person is going to obviously be used in court. I mean, it's so important to the case. How do you approach an interview like that? You have a guy sitting across from you that you think's a suspected serial killer. What do you do?
In both cases where I interviewed the suspect, and similar to this case, they want to talk about it. They want someone to hear the reason why, and it's always the poor me syndrome. It again becomes this narcissistic person who wants the world to know that the reason I had to kill these people, and as Mark said, because they were already dead, or whatever your reason. Now,
so Vince, do you play I kind of think of Law and Order, when I'm thinking about these sorts of things. I know that's really not the right thing to do, but do you kind of play like they're your friend, like you kind of like get them to open up, say, hey man, I understand this, that sort of thing?
They are the superstar. So when they're sitting in the room, we call it the box, I'll give this guy coffee, donuts, Burger King, whatever he wants, and I start to build a rapport. But in a case like this, in most serial killer cases, a good interviewer, a good detective has to be aware of a pending insanity defense. So as an interviewer,
interesting,
there's marks that I have to start looking for. And as Mark said, if you know right from wrong, and an insane person would kill somebody, carve their heart out, beat it on the concrete with a hammer, and when the police arrive, they say, hey, officers, how are you today? What's going on? What are you doing here? I didn't do anything wrong. That could be the definition of truly someone who doesn't know the difference between right and wrong. And as Mark said, if you hide a body and you're concealing a death, what you did was against the law. You don't want to be caught. So when you interview someone like that, you have to start thinking along those lines. and get them to say things that you can show in court they were not insane. They actually knew the difference between right and wrong. And then let them tell their story. They want it to be heard, and they want to brag about it, and you just let them talk. It's one of the easiest interviews I've ever done.
With an alleged serial killer.
Yes.
Rachel, let me add something to what Vincent was saying, and I agree with everything that he said. He obviously is speaking from a tremendous amount of experience. But let's just say that you go with the insanity defense, because what the hell else is there in a case like this, right? What you're telling jurors is he did it. He did everything that big bearded prosecutor is telling you that he did. However, he just didn't know right from wrong. Now, as Vincent pointed out, hiding a body, any minor indicator that he knew right from wrong is going to show that this thing doesn't work. But let's just say that those issues aren't there. Jurors, while they're not supposed to consider it, are thinking, well, wait, if we find him not guilty by reason of insanity, where's he going to go? He'll go to the hospital. And then those doctors over there at any point can say, oh, he's okay. He's cured. We fixed him. And that means he can hit the streets whenever the doctors say. Now, whether that's true or not, that is at least one person's perception. And they're going to share that in the jury room. That's
and Mark,
why,
I just want to...
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. I want to just bring in a live shot now from the courtroom in Ohio, and our viewers now can take a look. This is Shawn Grate, if we can pull up a picture in a few minutes here, of what he looks like. He's been, dressed in a shirt and tie, trying to look very professional. I can only imagine kind of how chilling it is to be in the courtroom. And for those, there he is right there. He's actually yawning. I don't know if you guys just caught that.
Doesn't look too worried to me.
What'd you say?
I said, he doesn't look too concerned to me.
No, he's picking some stuff off his fingers right now.
Listen, manicuring your nails at a murder trial is important.
Exactly here. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of been interesting. I've been noticing his demeanor throughout this trial. And this goes back to something that Mark and I were talking about before you hopped on, Vince, about how important it is because we're only seeing it from one angle, but the jurors are watching the testimony and then, also seeing his reaction. And apparently, from what I have observed, he's been kind of yawning all day long, okay, while this testimony is going on, while the jurors are sitting there. What kind of, I guess, how would that come off to the jurors? I mean, it's very disturbing, to say the least.
Rachel, it ain't coming off worse than the fact that he confessed to killing a bunch of people. I assure you, yawning is not on their list of priorities when you got a couple dead bodies under your bed. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. I mean, this guy has confessed to killing these women, so it's not like it would matter all that much. But again, we've always had surprises in these sorts of things, and if they're trying to go down that insanity route, perhaps him not caring, right, about what he just did could weigh in the jurors' minds. Vince, what do you make of it?
I would agree. I mean, he doesn't seem too concerned. And to me, again, I mean, he's I'm looking at him right now, he's almost smiling at whoever he's speaking with. So, again, this to me, and I'm trying to put myself, if I had to interview this guy, he seems like somebody's proud of what he did. And this production, this stage production, is now the showcase of his work. And I think he's really getting a thrill out of this.
Yeah,
Rachel, I want to throw in one point, okay? Look at the two bald guys next to him.
I think those are his attorneys, Mark.
I know, I figured. But just first of all, what a coincidence. But second of all, it's got to be the easiest case that those guys have ever had. Really, Mark? What do you mean? It seems like it'd be a tough case. It's easy.
I don't even have to ask the questions. Mark just asks himself the questions.
That's true. You don't have to worry when you're a defense lawyer. Number one, winning is defined by doing everything that you possibly can. These guys didn't create the facts. They were served to them on a silver platter from the prosecutor. The facts suck from a defense perspective. There's little you can do. So your job is to ensure that his constitutional rights are protected and that he's afforded not even zealous, just competent counsel by his side. The pressure's off, too, because you know what he did. It's not like you're losing sleep because the guy is innocent. you're doing the best that you can under these circumstances. That's it.
Wait, so are you telling me that you actually like representing guilty people more than innocent people?
Interesting.
Because then you know, because if I was representing someone who I truly thought was innocent, I would actually feel a bit more nervous going into that trial, because then it's up to me.
I agree. I was about to say yes, but I wanted to think about it. No, let me say the following. It is the innocent clients that keep me up at night, that keep me on my toes. The guilty ones, listen, I am just as zealous. I will fight for them. You would never know how I feel about the defendants because that's my gift, right? But when I know that they're guilty, the pressure is not as there as innocent, where nobody really believes in the presumption of innocence. They believe your client's guilty, and so you are a salmon swimming upstream. It's so difficult. It's very challenging for me. Give me a guilty person any day.
Okay, Vince, I want to turn now, because in all of our cases that we've covered, you know, we've always had, of course, detectives, police investigators, the lead detective on the stand. Sometimes they can be grilled for hours and hours and hours. You've been in that situation yourself, and I believe you now are an expert witness now that you've retired as a homicide detective. Talk about the kind of art, okay? I know that seems like a silly word, but you're the lead homicide detective on a case. You're being put on the stand. You're being grilled by the prosecution, probably in a friendly way, right? And then the defense turns on you to try to kind of chip away at your investigation. What do you keep in mind while that's happening?
The key, and this comes with experience, and any experienced homicide detective knows when you're testifying, we start out with the prosecution, and as you pointed out, it's nice. It's very friendly, and it's very, you know, it's almost as if we rehearsed this. As a detective, you need to come off to the jury as a professional, some sympathy towards the defendant. I know this may sound bizarre, but you have to be fair and impartial, and that's what you need to, you know, portray. So when the defense starts to cross-examine you, in a case like this where it's really not an issue of guilt or innocence, it's whether let's just say if there's a technicality as a detective, did something improper. Maybe you know, I was a little overzealous in the interview room and raised my voice. I can see the defense attorney, you know, keying in on that and trying to get some sympathy for the jury and make me look like a bully on the stand. All these things are going through your mind when you're testifying, and you're trying to put a case on where you show, like, this is my job. I did it. I took the interview. I collected the evidence. All of these different things I did, and the jury gets it. And it doesn't look like everybody's ganging up on this defendant. That we are still trying to be as fair as we can.
Of course, because that's the whole point, to find justice and truth, not necessarily convict someone right away, right? Right, Vince?
That's
Objection. BS.
The defense attorney objects to that. Okay, so if you're just joining us here on the Law and Crime Network, you will see we have a live feed inside the Shawn Grate murder trial in Ohio. That is the man, the suspected serial killer himself, sitting there. He's been chatting with his attorneys, picking his nails, yawning at points. Very bizarre behavior from this man who's on trial for killing 2 women and possibly more victims. It's probably, we've covered some pretty heinous cases here on the Law and Crime Network, unfortunately. It's one of the more disturbing ones. So in the meantime, as we wait for this trial to start back up after lunch, I'm going to continue to play some of the prosecution's opening statements so you can get a sense, in case you're just joining us, of where this trial is going. So let's continue to listen to that. And you are continuing to listen to some of the opening statements from the prosecution as he went through some of the rather disturbing details. Kind of hard to listen to, especially because you know that these women were allegedly forced into these awful sexual situations before they were then murdered. I'm here alongside criminal defense attorney Mark Eiglarsh, Vince Velazquez, a retired homicide detective, also on the line. You know, one of the things that we've kind of been discussing is the fact that the defense in this case decided to waive their right to give an opening statement. Mark, what do you make of that? Because, you know, it's not completely rare, but in a case like this, I guess they felt like they didn't have anything to say?
They got nothing. They got nothing. What do you say? The only thing you could possibly say is, look, he cleans up well. He doesn't look like a murderer. Look at him. Come on. He looks like one of the lawyers, part of the team. That's the only thing they got going for him.
I mean, we're looking at him right now. You can see a live shot inside that Ohio courtroom. He has his glasses on. He's sitting up a little bit, waiting for the jurors to go in. I want to get a little bit more inside the mind of someone like this. We talk, Vince, a lot about how a lot of these type of people have narcissistic personality disorders, that they really don't think that they're doing anything wrong, or they know they're doing something wrong, but they kind of enjoy the show. Do you think he seems that way as we look at him, as we see this trial unravel?
Yeah, I'm just looking at his mannerisms, the way he's looking around and interacting with his defense team, and it's almost as if he is attending a play and he's enjoying the show. Like, it's really, he doesn't seem to be engaged in his own defense. And I know that's an element, and Mark can kind of talk more about that. I think he's competent enough to help his lawyers, but he doesn't seem to be assisting in any way. He's just looking around, looking at his nails, yawning. I'm looking at him now. He's staring off into something. He's trying to, figure out what's going on the other end. But he doesn't seem to be engaged in his own defense, as if he's just going through the motions and just taking it all in.
But the fact that he confessed to investigators about what he did, the fact that, well, we don't know whose decision it was to take this to trial, but I think it's probably safe to bet he probably wanted to take this to trial. Regardless, the fact that he did, I mean, could this just be another one of these cases? I don't know if you followed at all this case we followed in Florida with Donald Smith, who he was convicted of raping, brutalizing this 8-year-old little girl. And we kind of all came to the conclusion, because he would smile at the camera, he'd be enjoying it, he tried to really bask in the limelight, that this was something that he really wanted to happen, because he wanted his 15 minutes of fame.
Well, let's look at this guy. This guy looks like the guy that's in a cell phone store selling you a cell phone. Very unassuming. He looks like like you would not look at this guy and say he's a serial killer, but what serial killer? What does a serial killer look like? Look at Ted Bundy. I mean, this guy was a good-looking, charming man, but what most sexual assault serial killers have in common is they're not that good with the ladies. They have a very bad personal social skill set with women.
Interesting. Okay? So that is something that studies have shown, that most serial killers, I mean, because a lot of times it's sexually motivated when you have these serial killer situations, that they're actually kind of trying to get some kind of redemption because they don't feel like they've ever been accepted by women, or something with their sexual prowess.
It could even be a problem with their mother in childhood. But typically, I know, forget that I even can think like a forensic psychologist for 1 second, but based on my experience, and this is just another element of his show, his, as you said, 15 minutes of fame. So it's no surprise to me that he's caught. There's 2 dead bodies in his house with this woman he kidnapped, who, thank God, managed to call 911.
And so Vince, I don't want to cut you off there, but I think we need to go live into court. It looks like they just swore in another witness who's on the stand right now. So, Mark, I know you have to leave, so we appreciate, as always, your commentary, and we love you on the network. But let's go right live into the Shawn Grate murder trial unfolding in Ohio. All right, we are inside the Shawn Grate murder trial. There is the defendant himself, a suspected serial killer. A guy by the name of Ton Molyneux was on the witness stand right there, and he was testifying to the condition he found his camper in when he returned. I'm here with Vince Velazquez, a retired homicide detective. And Vince, you know, tell me why this witness is so necessary to this case, because it doesn't really relate to the murders directly. I guess the prosecutors are trying to build a timeline of what he did leading up to all of this. Apparently he was camping out in these other people's trailers.
That's correct. I read the indictment, and there's actually 2 counts of burglary in the indictment: trailer lot 306 and trailer lot 307, presumably belonging to this gentleman who just testified. I imagine that, and there's also a burglary charge for one of the victims, or 2 of the victims' homes. So what they're probably trying to do is paint a picture for the jury to show the state of mind of the defendant, not just as it relates to the burglary of the victims' homes, but the burglaries of other homes, and putting a concise timeline together so the jurors can see exactly where he was and as he targeted his victims, as he's hopping around, burglarizing homes, staying there, hopping to the next one, and then ultimately his victim's house where he, kidnapped and tortured his victims.
And again, he has confessed to much of this, and there is DNA evidence. We can see another witness is going on the stand. But really quickly, one of the things they showed is the condition of the trailers, and it was really quite disgusting to see how he lived. Will that kind of play into the case as well?
I don't know. I don't know if that's what they're trying to show. In my experience, I don't think they're trying to paint a picture of how disgusting he lived in these trailers when he broke in. I think what they're showing is that this his life, his mind, his psychotic ways, he was unraveling. And to live in those conditions, this is as a detective's perspective, they're probably trying to show the jury that.
Interesting. Well, Vincent, we have another witness on the stand. Vincent Velazquez, a retired homicide detective, joining us for the afternoon. Thanks so much. Please come back on our program. In the meantime, let's take you inside the Shawn Grate murder trial that's going on right now in Ohio. It looks like another police detective type is on the stand. Let's listen in.